Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. Oftentimes when I sit in ceremony with plant medicines and psychedelics alike, I am enamored not only by the effects these medicines can produce, but also by how incredibly unique the experience of music is when connecting with these medicines. The best part about this, in my opinion, is that once I experienced this, music has never been the same in my life since. I truly feel that music is a psychedelic experience, and for me, the music that today's guest on the show creates is at the absolute top of my list with regards to being able to have a psychedelic experience even with no medicines added to the equation. As vibrational beings, music has the ability to heal us in profound ways and quite literally tune the instrument that we all are. And in today's episode, we will be diving into the psychedelic nature of music, the ability for music to guide psychedelic experiences, and the journey that our guest embarked upon in search of his own ability to heal himself when he was facing a series of health challenges, and the results that his project, Listening to Smile, not only did for him, but has been able to do for thousands of others who have benefited from the magic he is creating in this project. So strap yourselves in for a wild ride and help me in welcoming my man Ian Morris to the show. Ian, my man, so great to have you here with me today.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this, man. So thanks for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. And, I say this whenever I do a doubleheader. I'm not sure which episode will air first, but for everyone listening, Ian and I just rocked an amazing episode on Highly Optimized. And so we're fired up for this. We were starting to go down the rabbit hole really good at the end there. And it's so great because, what I always say about the two podcasts is that Highly Optimized is kind of like the business on the front, and psychedelics, this one I'm on psychedelics, is the party in the back making up a cool mullet. And you being into punk and metal and everything, right? We're aware of the mullet. And so it's a really cool way to think about it. And, we were chatting before we hit record about, some of the experiences you've had, which, you haven't had a lot of them, but they've been extremely profound, the ones you've had. But, I'm curious how you first became interested in interacting with the psychedelic world. I think your first thing you said correctly, if I remember correctly, was either cannabis or peyote. So I'd love if you could dive into that and kind of what got you to say, okay, I'll give this a go.
Well, I think in high school, I started hanging out with a lot of kids that were smoking weed. And so it was just something that became part of those friendships and getting together. And I remember Dark Side of the Moon was the first album I listened to, obviously back then. And just being high and listening to the music. And I remember just being because I was already so into music, and music had such a highly impactful effect on me, as a young person. I was just into so much different music. And when I listened to that album, there was a synthesizer track. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Something Color. It's a name. It's like a synthesizer track, kind of in the middle of the album, that just really goes deep, And I remember being high and listening to that, and just being completely like mesmerized with headphones on, and just got lost. There was people around me, but I just lost track of anything except being in the music. And I remember that experience had such an effect on me as a musician, of like really hearing music in that way. It was almost, the only way I can really describe it is, it was like maybe being in like the nosebleed section of a concert, and then this experience brought you down front row and center, almost like you're on stage with the band, like participating in it. And it was just such a different experience. And from that point, I think I got really fascinated with bands that were very unique and different. So like The Doors, Frank Zappa, the bands that you could hear and say, like, there was not anyone that could say like, well, they sound like The Doors, like if they were explaining another band, because there is no one that sounds like The Doors. There's no one that really sounds like Frank Zappa. You know what I'm saying? So it's like I started really getting into unique music that had these very unique qualities. And I started really listening, and it was almost like sessions with myself, smoking just for the fact to listen to music and to really dissect it, integrate it, become a part of it, and just really grow in that experience. And so from that, I think, you start seeing the exploits of like Jim Morrison, and you see these scenes in the movie where he's in the desert with his band and they're tripping, and they, are having these really powerful revelations of themselves, and seeing triggers in themselves, and you see this, the way that it impacted their creativity. And I think that from that point I was just always curious and fascinated by that world of psychedelics.
It's so cool because, being a musician myself, that's how I first became interested in cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happened was, I got into cannabis to help with anxiety at the age of 16. But I quickly realized that, at that point I was playing guitar probably, God, literally 6 hours a day. We talked a little bit about that 5-1, pattern in human design that we both have. And
Yeah.
that one line was like, you're going to practice until literally your fingers bleed every day. And it wasn't like a Gestapo type way of doing it. It was like, I want to do that. And so I was just completely encapsulated in that. And I remember the first time that I really interacted with cannabis and played guitar, it actually happened kind of by accident where, it wasn't something where I was usually interacting with cannabis like, on Friday nights with some friends or something like that. But there was one time where I went a little too heavy into the cannabis and I was having quite the ordeal rather than an experience. And I just came inside and I was like, what can I do to get myself away from this feeling? And I was like, well, I'm just going to start playing guitar. And I remember I hopped on the guitar and I wrote this song that was like one of the best songs I felt I had ever written at that point. And I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, I think there's something here. So then
Mm-hmm.
fast forward a couple of years, I was recording with one of my buddies at the time. And, we had the desktop computer set up with, I think it was Mixcraft Live. And we're just, smoking joints all day long, writing music. And it was just like absolutely amazing. And I think
Yeah.
that, for me, like you were saying, like psychedelics, and I do include cannabis as a psychedelic, they really opened me up to what was already there, but I was just unaware of. And so I think that for me, music has never been the same since. And the great part is I don't need to interact with psychedelics at this point to be able to have music affect me in that way. Because like we were talking about before we recorded, and I'd love for you to dive into this too. I think there's so much that happens in a psychedelic experience that the 4 to 12 hours, depending on what medicine you do, that you're actually in the experience, there's so much more. I mean, literally a lifetime of integration after that from each
Yeah.
experience that you can pull from. And I'd love for you to dive into that a little bit because as someone who, is not using psychedelics regularly, but yet has a very psychedelic life, I'd love to figure out how you engaged with psychedelics in a way to continue allowing your life to become a psychedelic. Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely perfect, man. I've never said that, what the way you just phrased that. I've never said that, but that's exactly how I feel. So, yeah, so like I have books that surround me that really, everything from like the biography of Abby Hoffman and conspiracy books and Graham Hancock and all of these things, to spiritual things like we were talking about in the last episode, like the book, Eden, with Anton Parks, and like the Nag Hammadi text, and all of these things that really start challenging what you have been born into and like what you've been told your whole life. And I think that for people who have not done psychedelics, it's really hard for them to grasp those concepts sometimes. And I think that the perspectives that you're shown on these trips, they're triggering, they're humbling, they are revealing the darkest parts of you, but at the same time revealing the greatest parts of you. And then somehow in the midst of all of that, it's also showing you your relation and position in the world, whether that be great or small at the time, of that revelation. I think that there are so many, like I was telling you, I call them like touch points. There's on my most recent one, I was barefoot and walking, on soil, on the ground, and I just felt the coolness of the earth on my feet, but I could feel, my veins, just pulsating and just in life, and I could feel my lungs, and I could feel everything to a degree that was so intensely connected that it was almost as if simultaneously I was living my consciousness in each organ, each feeling receptor, all of those things, but somehow still aware of the beautiful sun, somehow still aware of the bee flying across the path, and how I could hear the buzz turn into the slow down, like doo, 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 and you just watching the wings fly in slow motion. And it's like, when you look back on that touch point, it seemed like an eternity. But in the trip and the realization of the realisticness of the moment, that was just a blip. It was just a second. But when it's almost like you can't even fully comprehend the data points that are coming in. And when you look back at these touch points, you can fully see, like I was saying, like a exploded parts diagram. You're looking at in hindsight, unpacking these experiences. And it's like you start revisiting these in meditation, revisiting these and those touch points of memory. And you start pulling together this release work and healing and unpacking that, in my experience, has been years after those experiences. And so for me, I have never felt like I needed to do it on a regular basis. And there's times when it's very ceremonial and I'm like, I need to do that. And I'm not, so 5 grams, somewhat like that, 3 grams, 5 grams, have always been enough for me. It's not something where I feel like I need to go in a larger area, but it's the timing of it for me. And it's very ceremonial, very intentional, and meant for unpacking, creating those triggers, those revelations, those realizations, in those moments of like, what is my part in this? What can I do? Whether I'm looking for something creatively or I'm looking for some kind of release or some kind of healing, all of them have been very intentional in that. And so I think that it has such a profound, lasting, sustainable ripple, in my life, that it has caused my brain, my intellect, and my philosophical mind to be able to contemplate and operate as if I'm still in that state now, that it's had an effect where I can literally hold ideas that are just out there and contemplate them and say, but what if this is the way it is? And I think the openness is what I'm trying to get at. The openness and willingness to be open was enhanced much further through these experiences.
It's amazing because the analogy that just came to me, and I don't know what human design or Enneagram or astrology would say about this, but for some reason, the universe just speaks to me in analogies. And so the analogy I just saw, which I find a very good similarity between the two of us, is that, I've taken some pretty high doses of psychedelics before. And I found that at this point in my life, I just really don't need anything over, like, say, 5 grams when I'm going to do a mushroom experience. When I know, other individuals that I respect, they'll take 12 to 30 grams. And for me, I just haven't found that to be necessary. And so kind of the analogy that I found now is that in my younger years, when I was taking these larger doses, I didn't have such a belief in myself that I could change my reality. So if you think about a campfire, I was like, I don't have patience, so I need to throw kerosene on the fire to ignite it super high. But now that fire is stoked all the time. So maybe I just need a little spark or a match to get it going in an area that it might have gone out in, but it's always going now. So I don't need like all this kerosene anymore to really hit it. And that's also to talk about the frequency. Like, for me, I don't think I've done any psychedelics other than cannabis for the last year. And so for me, like, I just haven't found it necessary. I mean, literally, as you start integrating these experiences, I really feel what's happening, at least for me, and I imagine you might be able to relate, is that in many ways, we're moving back to the mind of a child. that is enamored, that is in awe of reality. And so I think a lot of the times when you access imagination on a regular basis through daily rituals, you are having that psychedelic experience with no medicines needed. Really the medicine that you're tuning into is the medicine of life itself. And I think that's really cool because, I think that, like I was telling you before we hit record too, like one of the reasons I made this show was not only to talk about psychedelics and talk about the potential benefits and the potential risks too, but also to tell people like, hey, sometimes you don't really need to do these very often. I mean, there are certain reasons if you're training to be a shaman or something like that, where, yeah, you're going to go through a lot of ceremonies. I was talking to Hamilton Souther yesterday, who's done over 1,000 ayahuasca ceremonies, but it makes sense because he was training to be a shaman. And so, like, I think it's kind of like, that whole saying of like the punishment needs to fit the crime. It's not that, but like whatever that is in a positive light, it's like the medicine needs to fit the objective at hand, I guess I would say. And so for me, I found that at this point in my life, I don't need like a complete course correction because I'm doing enough daily practices to make sure I'm aligned with my heart. But every once in a while, I have a sticking point that I'm like, okay, I can't solve this problem from the same level of thinking that created it. So therefore, I'm going to have a pattern interrupt of a psychedelic experience, guided and intentional, to be able to like allow me to step back from my subjective view of reality, look at it more objectively and go, okay, what am I missing? And then once I get that thread, well, then the next 6 months to a year is going to be me exploring that thread and really bringing it and integrating it into my daily life. And I love what you said about, being able to illuminate the dark aspects of you and also the light aspects, because this is the idea of the shadow and the golden shadow. And I think that what's so beautiful is you realizing that, oh, the only difference between the shadow and the golden shadow is that one is maybe like easier to bring light to, but at the end of the day, they're all aspects of our wholeness waiting to be reclaimed. And the only reason they get cast into the shadow is typically because of what we've been told to believe about said aspect. So maybe, for instance, like, with Paul Chek, for instance, he has 2 wives, right? So I imagine for a long time that was in his shadow, right? Because, he was like, oh, I feel this certain way, but society says this. Eventually he brought that out. And now it's like part of his thing he talks about all the time. It's no longer part of his shadow. Other people, it could be like, for instance, a challenge they went to as a child. Maybe they got abused or something, and it's been in their shadow. And then when they actually illuminate it, they realize, hey, this event happened. I might not have wanted it to happen, but now I can help relate to all the other people that were abused as a child by bringing this out. And so then it becomes part of that golden shadow once again. And so I really think this is a cool thread because, I found all of these things to be 100% accurate that you're speaking to. And it's just really cool to be able to chat with other people about their experiences and realize that, oh, once again, we're much more similar than we are different, right? And it's just like, I think that's one of the foundational lessons that psychedelics teach us. When I look at my friend when I'm on a psychedelic experience, especially if I'm in a heavy psilocybin experience, I can't really tell, like, is that me or is that someone else? And again, like that still exists when we're in our sober state of reality, right? Because again, we're all reflections of one another and we're all walking each other home. So I love this thread we're on. It's really cool.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing you talked about with Paul bringing that to light and using it. So when I was younger, I was 24, maybe. So I had 2 girlfriends. Like we all lived together, and it was a polyamorous type of deal. And it's really interesting. This comes up all the time. Like when I'm coaching people, more and more and more people are looking into these lifestyles. But it's not just that. I mean, everyone's still struggling. Is vegan better? Is metabolic and eating meat? And like everyone's struggling and searching for these things that are going to be answers in their life. And I think that for me, what was really interesting about the polyamorous relationship was this woman, after one of our events, came up and she said, hey, I've heard someone say that you had 2 girlfriends. I have this question for you. I'm attracted to this man at my yoga class and I'm married, and I'm finding it really hard because I'm not sure how to act on this. And so I talked to her about consciousness, right? Like, and I was telling her, like, for me growing up, when I started smoking weed, doing these different trips, these different thought processes came out. And I had to discern, like, is this coming from lust? Is this coming from greed? Is this coming from these darker shadow elements? Or is this something that I'm truly wanting to explore? And it's just interesting. I said, how does your husband feel about your attraction to this man in your yoga class? And she's like, I haven't told him yet. And so I was like explaining to her, I said, there's these elements, just like in psychedelics, there's these elements that are hugely expansive in these relationships, but there's also these dark shadows and these experiences that can be highly detrimental to you as a person. And I think you should know both going into them. And I think I talk to people about like psychedelics. People will ask me, and I say sometimes it's not a good fit for people. Sometimes the timing of when you're wanting to do it is not the right timing, and you're going to have to, I think, just like anything, like riding a bicycle or doing anything, you're going to have to start slow and build your way into these and experientially come to a conclusion for yourself. No one's going to be able to point that to you and tell you this is what you should do. And I think there's an educational part in all of these, like that you have to explore before you get started. But for me, what I found was that I'm the one that ended the relationship with both people, and a lot of my guy friends are like, dude, what
What are you doing?
What are you doing, put me in that position. And so I was telling them, I found for myself, I was wanting to love in a deeper, more profound way that was going into uncomfortable. And I was explaining to my guy friends, like I said, if one of us in that relationship had a tiff or a disagreement, there would be this separation, and the other person would step in to fill that gap for both people. And so there was never a dealing with the uncomfortableness. There was always just soothing of the thing. And so those things would become cycles because they were never addressed, and they were never dealt with in that uncomfortable way to get through to the other side. And so for me personally, I decided I would much rather have more open forms of communication, blunt and address things head on, but in a loving manner, and go deeper in a way that could take you to a new place in that relationship. And so for me, I chose to explore that. But that relationship helped me to see different facets of love that I probably never would have experienced in a one-on-one relationship up into that time period. And so I feel like all of these things that come out in these unpackings of these sessions that people have on psychedelics can be utilized for our highest good. And I think that if you're a healer or someone working in the holistic community, that there is just such an opportunity to face these things and to deal with these things. And each opportunity they come up, because none of us are perfect. It's a journey. You're always learning and expanding. These are opportunities to better yourself. And I remember Kobe Bryant, he said, it's not about competition with others, it's with yourself. And each day you want to be better than you were the day before. And I think that that's perfect application to these experiences. It's like, these things happen. Some things you're not going to like that come up about yourself. Some things you're going to love and be like, yeah, I've done good work. I'm doing a good job in that. And so I think like it's just about that competition of self, of like wanting to do better and be better, and to do the education and to do the work to get to that point. And like none of us are perfect. None of us are, we could be at a certain level in our mind and could get knocked down 50 stories by something that takes place because our ego gets involved, or, whatever it is. Right. And so I think like for me, these experiences have been monumental in showcasing those shadow parts. I think psychedelics and relationships are like probably some of the highest evolutions for us on this planet. You know what I'm saying? Like relationships, we're made to be in these relationships. They're learning experiences, each and every one. And there's something that we add and something that we take away from each positive and negative experience,
Absolutely. I think, I don't know if Paul said this, but someone said this, and I agree with it heavily, which is a relationship is an unspoken agreement to project on one another with the intention of healing one another. But unless you're aware of that, even if you are aware of that, it's still challenging as hell. I mean, but if you're not aware of it, it can be a very easy way to get into the victim mentality and start, blaming and all of these kind of things. When in reality, a lot of the times, like this is why Rachel and I, we have these weekly meetings where essentially we'll talk about sex, we'll talk about family, we'll talk about finances, we'll talk about pretty much the heaviest subjects that most fights or arguments or, predicaments that you get into are based on. And we'll just like have a weekly meeting based on we have a 4-week cycle and we talk about one of these subjects every week and then it just starts over every month. And so we just check in on these things because again, we know that like, okay, things like sex, finance, family, traveling, these are the 4 we have, it's like those things are so exciting. But at the same time, if we're not constantly checking in because we're growing both individually and together in a relationship every day, if we're not checking into these things, well, then they might get to a point where then it causes a huge catastrophic fight. And I'm not against those either. I think that can be a great thing too, because like alchemy, things need to, separate for a little while before they come back together. And I think that, what I've found is that being able to, have a partner who I'm so lucky is into this same type of stuff and the work and all this kind of stuff has helped a lot. And I think that interacting with psychedelics with a relationship is completely profound. I mean, I've had some absolutely awe-inspiring experiences with Rachel in that space, especially with psilocybin, especially with 5-MeO-DMT, which has just been absolutely incredible because at the end of the day, I love her for her, she loves me for me. And so if we're exploring who we are, well, then essentially at the end of the day, we want to allow each other to be our full selves and be together. And if we are able to communicate in that way, well, then it's going to help that. And so, what I found is that the psychedelic experiences have helped us, take our armor off and just be more truthful with each other when we're feeling something. Yeah. And I think that's so powerful because if you take that and you project it out to like the entire experience of life, well, then if you're doing that with your relationship, well, how you do anything is how you do everything. So now I'm much more quick to have conversations with friends if I feel like maybe something happened or like an awkward thing happened and I just want to get it out there and say it. I think that the more that we can be, metaphorically naked with one another, the better it can be. I mean, who knows? Maybe literally naked with each other too. I don't know yet. But what I found is that like, psychedelics allow you to be naked with yourself first. Yes. And I think when you have that experience, you can start to love yourself a lot more. Of course, like, Hamilton Souther, I was talking to yesterday about this, and he was saying something that I believe too, which he's like, I don't believe in a bad trip and a good trip. I believe that if you think you had a bad trip, there's just something else that you didn't get to finish in that experience. And he said that the way they do it in the Amazon is that if that happens, they have you re-enter the medicine space and kind of find closure with whatever you're still challenged with. And he said for most people, that takes a lot of courage because when you're traumatized or potentially like challenged by an experience you had, and then the remedy is, well, you must go back in and figure out what's going on there. Yeah. That could be a really big slippery slope. But I think at the end of the day, the more that we can do that and come out of these experiences having them happen for us, not to us, the more we're going to be able to have that nakedness with ourselves. And we're going to be able to accept ourselves, love ourselves, and then go into the world with that type of mentality. And I think that like that, it doesn't need to come from psychedelics, but whatever way you can get to that goal, you're able to then not be the wounded heel. You're able to actually go out and with an overflowing cup. We hear all these sayings, but for me, like knowing the idea of like, oh, okay, I'm a coach, so I don't want to go out there with my cup not overflowing because then I'll be pouring from an empty cup. Well, taking that from a statement that I knew how to say and then taking it to a realization and an embodiment were two totally different things. And I think that's one of the things that psychedelics have helped so much with is taking these concepts and notions and being able to embody them. And that's been really powerful for me. What is up, everybody? I hope you are all enjoying the show, and I wanted to stop by real quick and share a little bit about our latest podcast sponsor, Freedom Builders. Now, Freedom Builders are a team of graphic designers, website creators, videographers, social media marketing experts, and coaches that build out your custom online business from A to Z. This is a done-for-you service, which means they do the work for you while you get to put your focus back on what you love most, which is coaching your clients and bringing in sales. Now, as a former online fitness coach, Mike knows where your struggle points are and exactly how to help you overcome them. This is why he created Freedom Builders, so that you can scale your business while protecting your time and your energy. Now, you guys know that delegation is a business superpower, and you can activate this superpower today by scheduling a complimentary call with Mike at freedombuilders.com so you can start building the freedom that allows you to take your business to the next level. Alex and I recently connected with Freedom Builders for our Connect with Cannabis build out, and we could not have been happier with the results. With Mike and his team, They were able to go through and outline and create a personalized program for our experience, develop our brand identity, build and design a custom branded web page, professionally edit our program video content, custom design all of our slide presentations, automate our email marketing sequences, create a seamless payment system for our offer, design unique infographics for our social media content, and guide us through our proven launch blueprint to generate organic leads through our social media. So if you're a coach, facilitator, or healer listening to this ad right now, and you are looking to put freedom back into your life, once again, go to freedombuilders.com and book your complimentary call today. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the show, and I'm wishing you the best day ever.
What are your thoughts on microdosing? Like I feel like there's a lot of people who are afraid to go 4 grams, 5 grams, and they're interested and they're curious and they're really wanting it for some kind of emotional opening or some kind of intellectual like breakthrough. And I think the microdosing is a hot topic, right now with all the tech industry and everyone's like starting to explore that. So I just wondered, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on microdosing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, really what I feel about it is I think it's fantastic because, like you said, I mean, I don't believe psychedelics in any way are for everyone. But I do believe that there are a lot of people that psychedelics might be for, but yet they don't want to have that grandiose experience, right? They might want to in the future, but they don't want it right now. And yet they might be able to benefit from something like a microdose. And the great thing about a true microdose is if it's a true microdose, you're not going to feel it. I talk to people that are like, oh yeah, I microdosed and man, it was amazing. I felt all this stuff. I'm like, well, you probably didn't actually microdose then. Like a real microdose of like psilocybin is like 0.1. And so like, I think that like the great thing about that is now we have a lot of science coming out too that backs that like, I think the biggest thing with microdosing is people need to be more patient, because it's going to take probably about a month or 6 weeks to really start actually having some tangible evidence of like, oh, I'm not reacting the same way I was to my partner. Or, oh, that job I didn't like, I realized that all I have to do is find a new job. Like there's going to be some things that take some time, but I think if people can have that patience, I think it's a fantastic modality because it is kind of like if there were ever a world in which psychedelics were meant for everyone, I think microdosing is the number one way to be able to access that. Because again, I think for most people, they would be able to interact with a microdose. And, if they were, subject to something like a challenging experience and a higher dose, they're probably not going to experience that at the microdose level. Now, there's certain like genetic mutations and things like that. Like I know with cannabis, there's a mutation in the AKT1 gene that if you have, you're predisposed to psychosis and schizophrenia. It's very rare, but it does happen. And so like for that kind of individual, I don't know what a microdose of even cannabis would do. But I think for most people that don't have those genetic predispositions or even the epigenetic expression of that genetic predisposition, I think microdosing can be a fantastic way to do it. And I think that one of the cool things I have not explored myself, because every time I try to, I get it wrong, is microdosing LSD. But I think that has some really profound effects too. It's just a little bit harder to microdose than psilocybin. Every time I do it, I'm like, well, got to clear my calendar for the day. And so I think that's definitely like, what I feel about microdosing. I think it has great potential to be able to kind of like allow people to have their cake, eat it too, and it be gluten-free. Where essentially like if they don't want to interact with a strong dose of psychedelics, but they're still really interested, they can get their feet wet that way and maybe not even have to ever have a grandiose experience and still get a lot of positive results from it.
Yeah, acid is so crazy. So I've done acid once, but the very first time I did it, I did 4.5 hits.
Wow.
And so, so it wasn't on purpose. So basically I was
That's how it always goes.
Yeah.
With acid, it's always like, oh, this is more than I expected.
Yeah. So what happened is the people that I was, doing this with, they were all shorter because I'm 6'2". I'm not like super tall, but I'm tall. 6'2", and like most of the guys I was hanging out with were like 5'7", 5'8", they were just shorter guys and smaller dudes, like skinnier, smaller framed guys. And, I played football and baseball and just like had a bigger frame. And so we all took our first dose and then everyone was just kind of like, we were hanging out, playing music instruments and just kind of hanging out until, the things would kick in. And I started noticing that they were kind of, getting into this state. And I was like, I don't feel anything. Like there's nothing happening for me. And so like, 45 minutes, hour and a half go by, still not really feeling anything. 2 hours, not feeling anything. They're like, you're bigger, man. You got to take more. Right? They're like, that's the only thing we can think of. And then they were like, so the guy was like, take one more. So I took another one. More time goes by, nothing's happening. So he puts another, like, he had done it far more than me, done and had more experience with it. And so he was like, you got to eat food. So he put the other two hits in a hamburger, and he's like, eat this. So like I eat it because we were younger when I was doing this. I think I was man, I must have been like 23, 22, something like that. So so I eat the hamburger and I sat down on this couch, and I would say probably like 40 minutes later, it was just like it was just like this huge. There was like cats dripping out of the ceiling fan every time. It was making this noise as it was going around, and there was cats in the room, and I was petting cats. But when I was doing the touch points, I was telling them the next day that there was just so many cats in the room, and they were like, dude, there was 2 cats in the room. But in my vision, they were like dripping out of the ceiling fan, and I was petting all of these cats on the couch, right? So there was just this experience where it lasted for a long time. Like I ended up going for a walk because I got so heavy that I just wanted to be outside, like in nature and away from the people. And so there was this experience that I tell people is very much like a spiritual walkabout, that I think I walked like 10 miles, 11 miles, and like, going through woods, and just, I remember being on the streets where I put my hand on a telephone pole, and the flaky like paint where they like paint on it and it was like flaking off. It's like I put my hand through the telephone pole and was like holding the electric synergy that was coming, and you could hear the light above me doing the little buzz and like all these crackle sounds and stuff. And I don't know what I thought I was doing, getting the power from the grid or something. But, it was definitely a very different experience from mushrooms for sure. And I think that for that being the first time and taking that, I mean, in my opinion, that was a large dose for me. I don't know, that I would do something like that again, but it was still such an experience of the unpacking. There was so much that I was facing in relationship to my father and I, to my family and I, because I've always felt very different from my family, almost like I was like an alien implant to my family because of how different my viewpoints and like all the things that I'm interested in are very different. My family is all like CPAs and IT people, and I'm like over here doing this, bohemian, nomadic lifestyle, traveling all over the place. And it's just very different. They've been in like the same place their whole life, and just a very different lifestyle. So I think like all of that came up in that unpacking, of that journey, and that spiritual walkabout, I think is still probably one of the most profound things, to be in that state and to know that I needed to distance myself from the people. I needed a break, and then going on that walk, and just the thoughts, the revelations, the realizations, the unpacking that went on that walk, and to experience reality in that state, that, heightened state. Your perspectives of things change. You become more entangled in the role that nature's playing, because we a lot of times forget what's out there. We're in our computers or doing our work or paying our bills or in fear of not having this or whatever it is, and we forget that connection. And I think that these medicines are so monumental in helping us to reestablish that connections with nature, but also ourself.
Absolutely. What I often say is that the difference between, psilocybin and LSD for me has been that psilocybin takes you on a quest, where LSD puts you in an open world map. And I like to think about like RPGs like this, right? You can either play the main quest, right, and like go for the missions, or in which case, like, you're going to be led on a certain path, or you can just wander around the map. And I think that's for me what LSD has done. LSD is like, one of my favorite medicines, because I love just not really knowing what I'm going to think about or what I'm going to do. And, maybe ended up like looking at a blade of grass for like 3 hours and just being like, what is this? Like, I know it's grass, but like, what really is it though? Whereas, psilocybin, you're probably going to be laying down, getting shown a lot of stuff and going through many different emotions. And it doesn't mean you can't go through that with LSD, but very similar to you, I find that LSD wants me to go on the move. Like I can't
Yeah.
just sit down, like
Yeah.
you want
Yeah.
to have a bad experience on LSD, be told to sit down for 6 hours, like there's a certain point where I'm like, I got to move. Like I got to get this
Yeah.
energy out of me somehow. It's almost
Yeah.
like psilocybin is very grounding, whereas like LSD is very electrifying. And so with
Yes.
grounding, you want to
I
become the
agree.
ground. With electrifying, you want to go use that energy somehow. I remember in one of
Hmm.
my experiences, a buddy of mine, we had got given some LSD by a friend of ours, and this guy spent probably 6 hours just sprinting around the house as fast as he could. Just like he would stop and then he would sprint and he would come in just sweating. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? He's like, I'm out there sprinting. And I'm like, how is it? He's like, it's amazing. And so I went out and sprinted with him for a little while. And it's just so much fun to be able to like not really have a specific purpose there. I mean, you might have set an intention, but like you're just enjoying being a human being. I think that's one of the best reasons, or my favorite reasons why I like LSD so much. And it's interesting how all of these medicines can be classically called psychedelics, but they work in different ways. I know
Yeah.
you've done peyote before, and I'm curious to hear about your peyote experience because I had a peyote experience, and what a rough medicine. I mean, beautiful, but like the first, I would say 3.5, 4 hours were me thinking, do I need to puke? Am I supposed to puke? Where do I puke? And it was funny because,
Did you
I had,
puke? Did you
I
puke?
I never puked. I
You never
literally,
puked. Yeah.
I thugged it out and I did not puke. I should have puked
Yeah.
though, because I was
Hmm.
in a traditional ceremony and I just didn't get the right instructions beforehand. I didn't ask. And so right before I went into the experience, I had heard peyote you purge on. So I had mentioned it to one of the individuals there, and he was like, no, I don't think peyote is a purging medicine. So I went into it with that, like, do I puke? Do I not? Little did I know, after the fact, they were like, oh, if you're going to puke directly into the fire. And I'm like, that is the most metal thing I've ever heard in my life. I'm like, here I am, like just suffering through this like feeling of puking. And little do I know, they're like, puke right in the middle of the fire that everyone's dancing around, like, do it. And so it was so interesting, but I'm curious to hear your experience on that medicine as well.
Yeah. It was intense for me. I would dare to say I felt like it was not a good experience for
Yeah.
me, but I puked so much. Like I threw up so much, but I don't know if it's because I wasn't planning on doing that and it came up in my day, like in the kind of mid-morning thing, and it was with a friend and he was having a really intense time and really wanted to do this for kind of a ceremony of release and wanted me to do it with him. And so it wasn't something I was planning on. So I was just kind of like, sure, let's do this. Right. so, we, yeah. So for me, like, I think it was the food I probably ate earlier
Mm.
in the morning. And I think that, cause like I said, it wasn't something I was planning on. And I just puked so much. Like I remember puking 5 or 6 times and just felt so disgusting. But after that horrible feeling, like it was probably like 4 hours,
Yeah, that's what it was for me
somewhere,
too.
yeah,
Yeah.
somewhere in there. I started feeling this different, like, when you get high for the first time, like on cannabis, you're like, whoa, like you start feeling that kind of like, and it's a different experience. So it's very new. This experience was very different in that same kind of way. Like I felt like I was in my body, but it was almost like I was in a video game or something. Like the way that I was interacting with everything was very, very different from anything else. And I noticed that my thoughts were directly, like immediately, any kind of thought of fear, you felt the ripple through your body, like the quickest I've ever felt, like boom. And then like you had to be very conscious of like not going there and like elevating to a higher thought. And then it would instantaneously shift. And it was like knowing how quick that the ripples were going through the body was like super intense. Like I was like, holy shit. Like, it was a very different experience. So then when you see that, luckily you're able to say like, I want this experience more than this other heavier experience. And so I think it helped having another person who was with me that was experiencing that for the first time as well. It was just like us doing that together, which in hindsight is probably something that you don't want to do, right? Like not do that in that way. But there was this bonding experience that took place. And it's so funny because we actually played baseball together. We were like two pitchers on a team, and like we just had this bond already, but this bond was even greater, from that next phase or next level of doing this together. And there was a lot of talking as the trip progressed, and there was a lot of tears and crying and releasing that happened on this journey. And I think it was a very intense medicine. And I think, like, definitely if you're going to do something like that of that caliber and level, I would highly suggest doing it with someone who's more trained, not doing what I did. But I also think ultimately it was a heavy experience in the first 3-4 hours, and then it started lightening up. And I think it was becoming more conscious of how quick your thoughts are enhancing the experience. And like the thoughts instantaneously turned to feeling, what I mean? It was just and so I think that trip for me was just massive release, and holding space for someone and having compassion for their relationship ending, them feeling lost in life, and like identifying with a lot of things he was struggling with, I was struggling with as well. And so there was just this kind of male bonding that was able to take place, and a releasing of just fears that were like on a really monumental level, I think.
Yeah, it's so cool you mentioned that, because for me it was a very similar experience, like where it was about 4 hours into it, and I had thought like, oh, I've already felt the effects of this. And so a couple hours later, the ceremony ends, and it's like probably midnight at this point. We have some soup or whatever, and then we decide, oh, we're going to go hang in the yoga shala, because this was actually in Mexico that I did this in a traditional ceremony. And so we go up to the yoga shala, and we're hanging out up there, and my buddy puts on some music, and I'm like, oh, I feel like dancing. And like literally that was like when it hit me. Like all of a sudden, like I start dancing, and I'm like, I feel alive. And like there was this feeling of like just this intense heat. And I mean, peyote is a very masculine medicine. So like it was just for the next literally 6 hours, we all danced until sunrise. Like it was wild. And I feel like that was not the whole experience, but that was like the gem for me, was that experience of like just dancing all of the sickness and the emotion and everything that had been stagnating in me out of me. That was what I felt that experience was. And, it was even like the whole next day, I had such an afterglow. I probably danced for no joke another 8 hours after I woke up the next day after like 4 hours of sleep, which for me, I'm a prima donna when it comes to sleep. Like I always get 8, if not 8.5.
Yeah.
So like if I get something like 4, usually like it's a wrecked day for me. I woke up like fully charged, went right out of the yoga shala, put music on, and just danced while everyone else was sleeping. Like I just could not stop dancing, and it was the best feeling ever. And it was very empowering. Like I got back from that trip and really took a lot of action on my life. I feel like it really kicked my masculine energy into drive in a way that I hadn't experienced before in any other medicine.
That's interesting. So I feel similar. Like when I look back and talking about this with you, I'm thinking back about after that experience. And when you said the heat thing, the one thing I remember is that my stomach just felt this intense heat. And it wasn't like heartburn. It was like this burning, like in the core. Like you just felt this like intense heat, almost like you could put your hand there and feel your belly just like so hot, radiating like a furnace almost, like I do remember that. Like, yeah, that was, yeah, that was, yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty interesting. Yeah.
It's so funny because like, this is why I love chatting about these experiences, because even though that was, I think, 3 years ago now, in talking to you about it, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember new aspects of that experience now that I had like yet to remember until this moment. And I think that's one of the coolest things too. And, one of the things I'm curious on now that we've dove into a lot of your experiences is like, now when we look at your life, right? Of course, listening to the smile and all of these things, like what have these experiences done for you in becoming the version of you that you are today? Like, how did they, maybe you don't have exact instances of how they kickstarted anything, but like when you think about these experiences, what they illuminated for you and now what you're doing, what do you think the through line or the connection point there is?
Oh man. So so my uncle is friends with Alex Gray, the artist, and he also knows Drumbelow, Melchizedek, that wrote the
Mm.
Flower of Life books one and two, and my uncle's his name's Paul Taylor, and he's lives in Florida. He's a professional sculptor. He's done like his art's been on like Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous and stuff like that. Where like Ron Rice, the owner of Hawaiian Tropics, paid him to make some really awesome pieces of art, sculptures, and I remember talking to my uncle and him saying something like, when I first started, these sculptures might take 20 years to complete. They're so massive, like 9 feet tall. Like he has this full angel with angel wings. It's like 9 feet tall. And I was like, how long did that take you? And he's like, when I first started doing this stuff, it was like this time period. Now that I'm doing it, the process is more refined. I have more experience and I can do it much faster and create these pieces of work. And like when I'm looking at my music, I feel very similar. And back then when he was saying that, I didn't really fully understand. Now you get new technologies, new softwares, new different things that help your workflow be quicker. You learn from experience, like not to do some mistakes that you made in the past, so you're a little more quicker in that way. You don't make as many mistakes, and you know what sounds good to you, so you have this template, and it's much quicker turnaround. I think the medicines that I have done have the perspectives that they laid out and opened up. It's like I don't think those doors get shut. I think they stay open, and the possibilities and the creative thinking skills in my creativity are highly advanced. And I think from doing 7 years of creating every single day and creating new music, and I'm in the studio all the time, the output level is just astronomical. I mean, we're talking on a monthly basis, I'm probably completing somewhere between 10, 15, and 20 tracks. And then we're selecting 7 of those that go on to the album each month. And then we have, other projects I'm working on with other affiliates or other companies. And so, you're writing, recording, mixing, and mastering somewhere between like 15 and 20 tracks total each month. And then I still have other side projects that I put time into because I love, and there's so much energy inside of me that comes out. And I think like everything plays a part in that, the sexual energy and connections with your partner, to the passion and the fire that lights you up doing the work that you're here to do. And you start doing all these things, and all of them are giving to your life force energy. And then all of your life force energy is being put into this passion, which then is being utilized by all these different people around the world. And it's just truly like a humbling experience. But I think the part that I give props to the psychedelics in is that the expansion of my mind and possibilities and the what ifs are much, much greater. And that door has stayed open so that I'm still operating in that same space on a daily basis because of those experiences.
Yeah, how I've always framed it for me, and I highly agree with everything you're saying, is that it's actually like how psychedelics can expand the mind is not like by actually adding on to the mind. It's actually by taking away the limitations and the programs and patterns and the governors essentially that have been put in our mind by society, by parents, by whatever, right? Because
Right.
when we're in our programming ages of 0 through 20, especially 0 to 6, our subconscious is wide open and we're taking in everything, kind of like writing the patterns and programs that we then live by and create the ego from. And I think that like in that time, there's a lot that gets picked up. It's kind of like jargon that, at a certain point, psychedelics being one of the ways you can do it, you can go in there and actually start removing this stuff. And as you do so, the mind becomes much more expansive. It's almost like the clouds you've created start to dissipate and you have access to everything now. And now you have a much broader array of things to pull from and creations to make from those things you pull from. And I think it's so amazing, man, because that's exactly what I've experienced and continue to experience. I mean, it's an ever evolving process where every time I'm doing a podcast, every time I'm making a new product for, connect with cannabis or grow with cannabis or anything like that, every time I'm cultivating cannabis, every time I'm playing music, every time I'm exercising, I mean, everything is just expanding. Where now I'm much more in touch with intuition. So I allow my heart to come before my mind so that in the morning I tune into my heart and I go, okay, what are we feeling today? What's our mission today? And then I use the mind to then actually be able to make that happen. And I think that's been another thing that's happened for me is being able to put the horse before the cart, not the cart before the horse, and being able to go, okay, how do I make this sustainable and have fun doing it? Well, I tune into my heart each morning. So then whatever I'm doing that day is exactly what I want to do. And maybe there are some things on my calendar that maybe are a little out of alignment with what I want to do that day, but I'm tuning in and giving myself time to say play guitar or exercise or go for a walk or go for a bike ride or whatever in the morning. So my battery is already fully charged. And then I can come at the day with an expanded point of view because I'm happy. I'm filling my own cup. And now if there's something on my calendar that maybe isn't exactly I want to do that day, it's something where I can reimagine it as something different where I can actually allow myself in my mind to be able to foster like a more exciting feeling in doing any of those things. And I think that's a really cool place to be at. It's helped me a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's beautiful, man.
Yeah. Yeah. And, one thing I'm curious for you is, what has been your experience within psychedelic spaces and music, right? Because I know for me, and I think we talked about it a little bit already, but, like, why do you think music differs? I don't know if you have a legitimate logical reason, but what comes through to you intuitively as to why music feels different when you're in a psychedelic experience and therefore why it's different kind of there on after? I mean, it doesn't really go back to normal once Pandora's box is open. It's hard to go back. But what are your thoughts on that?
Are you familiar with ketamine?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. So recently, I was working with a company that wanted me to experience that because I had never done that. So I agreed to experience that and to work creating music for that space. And what I noticed is that ketamine is very different from the others in the sense that I feel like you're a lot more sensitive to sounds in that state. And it's a very different experience. So I think like understanding the medicine that you're working with as a creator of the music that people are going to be using in those types of ceremonies or experiences is really beneficial, to know. So for instance, anytime I would put something together for ketamine, it would be I would use not I would not use things like gongs or high pitched bells, different things like that. And so you start like with acid, like you were saying, it's something where you want to move. So in those experiences, there's definitely things that I like to incorporate that are a little more mid tempo, a little more movement based, and also highly soundtracky the sense of like synthesizers or strings or things that kind of evoke these emotions. And I think acid is almost like a wave. It's like these little peaks and valleys that you're riding. And so if you can create an experience that goes with that. Now, something like mushrooms, I feel like almost every time in my experience, the real power is very slow and subtle hand drums, grounding, very earth based instruments, things that like flutes and things that are very grounding and bring people in, but also something that has a drive, like the way, house music has the boom, 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 right? That's a very shamanic beat that is very consistent and stays like a pulse for that experience of that dance music. Now, shamanic drumming is very similar to a lower tempo, beats per minute, but you're talking about something that is consistently staying with the person. And I have found that mushrooms are just those journeys are usually highly effective to go deeper utilizing that kind of music. So because I'm not a like in the realm of like forefront of exploring psychedelics, but I'm in the realm of I feel like for myself I've done it enough to have an idea. And the way I look at it is I saw this interview with Stevie Ray Vaughan and or his brother, and they were talking about him being in the studio when he covered Little Wing by Jimi Hendrix. And if you've never heard this, I highly suggest you listen to Little Wing by Stevie Ray Vaughan because it blows the doors off of Jimi Hendrix version. It's beautiful. It's absolutely probably one of the most beautiful guitar pieces I've ever heard in history. You know what I'm saying? Just so much soul, so much passion, so much feeling into that track, right? Well, what's interesting is they said that he had his eyes closed listening to Jimi Hendrix version at the studio, like down in downtime of recording. And his brother like said that he was just sitting there like smiling, eyes closed, and he's like, "What's up, man?" And he said, "I know what he was going for on this. I know what he was trying to do." And then he was like, "Let's record this." Right. And so it's just like went in. And if you listen with headphones to that recording, you can hear the amps buzzing in the background, like when he's got pauses in between the guitar, and you can hear it's almost like you're in the room with them the way they recorded it. And it's just truly like a capsule of time, reflected in this audio recording. And I think it's just so beautiful that I feel that way. Like I've experienced things and someone comes to me and they say, "We would like to create something for this space customized. We want to have this experience. Here's kind of the template of the way we want it to flow." And I'm sitting there with my eyes closed. I'm like, "I know what you're going for." Right. It's like, it's enough. It's enough to be in the moment and to experience those things and to experience a diverse, offerings of plant medicine in different ways, that I'm in the zone with you to know, like, okay, I know what you're going for. And as a musician, it's just such an honor to be able to create music for those spaces. It's so fun and just so cool, like to hear people's feedback at the end, and that it helped them to go deeper or help them to release or whatever it may be. And it's just so humbling and exciting to be a part of that with people.
Oh, I love that, man. I'm so glad I asked that question because, it's like that is like the encapsulation of what I feel the right brain is, right? Like you just experience something, or you like listen to a song, right? And therefore experience it. And you just go, "I get it." Right. And there's nothing the left
Yeah.
brain can tell you about why you get it. You just have this feeling that you get it. And being able to take that feeling and then transmute it into a work of art is so amazing, man. And Ian, I cannot believe that once again, an hour flew by so goddamn quickly. It's amazing. We were in an amazing heart flow, but man, I want to make sure I give people an opportunity to know where they can find you, where they can find Listening to Smile, and all of the amazing things you're putting together, because I truly feel that, like I said in the intro, you are pioneering this whole new way of interacting with music, with or without psychedelics, that is just so powerful. And I really want people to know where they can find that.
Yeah, so my personal email is Ian@Listening to Smile. I love hearing from people. I answer all those myself. Listeningtosmile.com is the website. On Instagram, it's just Instagram.com/listening to smile. So we have some things on there. And Bandcamp, there's Listening to Smile, the number 1. So listeningtosmile1.bandcamp.com takes you to our wellness series, and you can listen to samples of music on there. So that's probably the easiest ways for people to get in touch with us.
Beautiful. And my last question for Ian is this. Let's say someone listens to this conversation and they're extremely excited to explore psychedelic medicines and whether or not they fit in their own life. What is the one piece of advice that Ian Morris would suggest to allow them to use the proper discernment in choosing whether these medicines are right for them in their lives?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a education base. I think that there's tons of information online now. It's becoming more widely accepted in a lot of circles. So I think just getting online and doing some research about the pros and cons and looking at that. And then also I think reaching out to someone who has experience in these realms. And so that comes from the education. You kind of do research and you find someone who's local, someone who has experience in that, and someone that you feel a synergy or a connection or resonance in their energy. And then I think for me, the only other thing I would say is just that I really think doing work ahead of time, getting into breath work and meditation and kind of setting yourself up for success so that you have a good trip and that it's everything that you're wanting it to be, revealing, releasing, healing, uplifting, whatever that is. I think that putting in some work ahead of time before those ceremonies is something that would be highly beneficial.
I wholeheartedly agree with that, my man. And alrighty, guys, I feel it's safe to say after this incredible expose into the world of music as a healing medicine and psychedelic experience in and of itself, that I, for one, am even more passionate about exploring these realms at a deeper level. And my hope is that each of you walked away from this episode with a deeper curiosity to engage in music in the same way. Ian is an absolute master of his craft and is dedicated and devoted to helping the world at large be empowered to move through their own healing process through his work in Listening to Smile. And for any of you listening who are looking to take a deep dive into Ian's world, make sure to check out the show notes for this episode, where you can not only discover where to find his work, but also receive a 20% discount on all of his creations to help you begin your journey of healing through music today. Ian, thank you so much for doing the important work you're doing in the world, for being a leading voice behind the potent powers of music as a healing tool, and for sharing your time, wisdom, and experiences with the listeners and me on the show today. And until next time, my brother, may your journey be smooth and full of light. Aho.